A woman left to die in winter's grip. A rancher haunted by loneliness. One storm that changes everything. When Lian Chen survives the brutal frontier winter only to knock on death's door, a feared ranch owner named Caleb Mercer offers her a choice that will shatter every wall between them, if the unforgiving land doesn't kill them first. If you're drawn to stories of survival, unexpected love, and the courage it takes to belong, stay with me until the very end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels across the world. The cabin door hung crooked on frozen hinges, and through the gap, wind screamed like something dying. Lian Chen pressed her back against the wall farthest from that gap, her breath visible in short, desperate clouds. The blanket wrapped around her shoulders had stopped providing warmth 2 days ago. Now it was just weight, just fabric between her skin and the air that wanted to strip everything away. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt her toes. The small iron stove in the corner had gone cold 3 nights past. She'd burned the last chair yesterday, legs first, then the seat, watching the flames devour the only furniture she'd owned in this new country that had promised so much and delivered nothing but loss. Her parents were buried somewhere along the trail west, casualties of disease and exhaustion. Her brother had made it as far as the work camps in the rail yard town 60 miles south, but a falling beam had taken him before winter even arrived. Lian had made it here, to this dying settlement on the edge of Montana territory, with nothing but the clothes she wore and a small bag of rice that was now empty. The wind found the gap again, shrieking. She closed her eyes and thought about warmth. Not the warmth of fire, that memory was too painful now, but the warmth of her mother's kitchen back in Guangdong, the steam rising from bamboo baskets, the smell of ginger and scallions, her father's laugh when he tasted something good. Those memories were all she had left to burn. A sound cut through the wind's howl, sharp, deliberate, knocking. Lian's eyes snapped open. For a moment she thought she'd imagined it, that cold and hunger had finally pushed her mind past the edge of reason. But then it came again, 3 solid strikes against wood, purposeful and unmistakably human. She tried to stand and nearly collapsed. Her legs had gone numb from sitting so long in one position, trying to conserve what little warmth her body still produced. She gripped the wall, forced herself upright, and stumbled toward the door. Her hands shook as she pulled it open. The man on the other side was a wall of wool and frost. He stood well over 6 feet, broad-shouldered beneath a heavy coat darkened by snow. Ice clung to his beard, and his eyes, pale blue, almost colorless in the white landscape behind him, fixed on her with an expression she couldn't read. Not pity, not disgust. Something harder, more measuring. Behind him, 2 horses stood patient in the storm, their breath steaming. "You the Chinese woman?" His voice was rough, shaped by wind and years of shouting orders across open land. Lian nodded, not trusting her voice. Her English was serviceable, but uncertain, and cold had made her throat tight. Thought this place was abandoned. He studied the cabin's interior over her shoulder, taking in the empty stove, the absence of furniture, the desperate poverty of it all. "How long you been here?" 2 months. Her words came out thin, barely audible over the wind. "You got food?" She shook her head. "Firewood?" Another shake, his jaw tightened. "You planning to freeze to death, or were you hoping for something different?" The bluntness of it sparked something in her chest. Not anger, but something close to it. Something that felt like the last ember of who she'd been before loss had carved her hollow. "I am not planning anything," she said, and her voice came stronger now. "I am surviving." His expression shifted slightly. Not quite a smile, but close. "Doesn't look like it's working." "No," she admitted. "It is not." He was quiet for a moment, studying her with those pale, unreadable eyes. Then he stepped back, away from the door. "Get your things. You're coming with me." Lian's breath caught. "Where?" "My ranch. Lost my cook to pneumonia last week, and I've got 15 men who can't boil water without burning it. You know how to cook?" She nodded slowly. Cooking was one of the few skills she'd carried from her old life to this new one. Her mother had taught her well. "Then you've got work if you want it. Pays $10 a month plus room and board. You'll sleep in the bunkhouse annex. Separate quarters. Locked door. Any man touches you, I'll break his hands." He said it without drama, like he was discussing the weather. You don't want to come, that's your choice. But you stay here, you'll be dead before morning. Leon looked past him at the storm, then back at the empty cabin that had become her tomb. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. Why help me? His expression didn't change. I need a cook. You need to not die. Seems straightforward. There was no sentiment in his voice, no charity, just cold practicality. Somehow that made it easier to believe than kindness would have. I will get my things. She turned back into the cabin, but there was almost nothing to gather. A change of clothes, worn thin, a small wooden comb that had been her mother's, a bundle of letters written in characters this country would never understand. She wrapped them in the blanket she'd been wearing and stepped back outside. The man, she still didn't know his name, was already moving toward the horses. He gestured to the smaller of the two, a sturdy mare with patient eyes. You ride? A little. She'd learned on the journey west, though never well. That'll do. He swung up onto the larger horse with practiced ease, then looked down at her. Name's Caleb Mercer. Ranch is 8 miles northwest. We push hard, we'll make it before dark. Leon pulled herself into the saddle, her frozen fingers clumsy on the reins. The horse shifted beneath her but didn't bolt. Leon Chen, she said, though he hadn't asked. Caleb nodded once, then turned his horse into the storm. They rode in silence, and the world became nothing but white wind and the rhythmic movement of the horse beneath her. Leon focused on staying in the saddle, on keeping her eyes open against the snow, on breathing despite the cold that wanted to freeze her lungs solid. Time lost meaning. There was only the storm and the broad back of Caleb Mercer ahead of her, steady as a compass point. When the ranch finally emerged from the white, it looked like salvation rendered in wood and stone. Buildings clustered around a central yard: barn, bunkhouse, main house, storage sheds. Smoke rose from multiple chimneys and warm light glowed in windows. Figures moved between structures, men in heavy coats tending to animals and securing equipment against the storm. Caleb dismounted and immediately began unsaddling his horse. Leon slid from her mare's back and nearly collapsed when her feet hit the ground. Her legs had gone completely numb during the ride. A young man with red hair and a sparse beard appeared from the barn, taking the horse's reins. His eyes widened when he saw Leon, but Caleb's voice cut off whatever he'd been about to say. Ethan, stable the horses and get word to the men. New cook starts tonight. Anyone's got a problem with it, they can come see me. Yes, sir, Mr. Mercer. Ethan's eyes stayed on Leon for another moment, curious but not hostile, before he led the horses away. Caleb turned to her. Can you walk? Leon tried and stumbled. He caught her elbow, his grip firm but not rough. Come on. He guided her across the yard toward a smaller building attached to the main bunkhouse. Inside it was warm, blessedly, impossibly warm. A small stove burned in the corner, and the single room held a bed, a trunk, a table with a basin and pitcher. This is yours, Caleb said. Door locks from the inside. You need anything, main house is across the yard. Kitchen's there too. That's where you'll work. Leon looked at the bed with its thick quilts, at the stove radiating heat, at the simple furniture that represented more security than she'd known in months. Get warm, Caleb continued. Rest an hour. Then I'll need you in the kitchen. Men eat at 6. He moved toward the door, but Leon's voice stopped him. Mr. Mercer. He turned back. Thank you. His expression remained unreadable. Don't thank me yet. You can't cook. You're back out in the cold. This is work, not charity. The bluntness should have stung, but it didn't. It was honest, and honesty was something Leon understood. I can cook. Then we'll get along fine. He left, closing the door behind him. Leon stood in the center of the small room, feeling warmth seep back into her body in painful increments. Her fingers tingled, her toes burned. She unwrapped the blanket from around her shoulders and sat slowly on the edge of the bed. The mattress was stuffed with straw, but it might as well have been filled with clouds. She allowed herself 5 minutes to simply sit and absorb the warmth. Then she stood, splashed icy water from the pitcher onto her face to shock herself fully awake, and changed into her other set of clothes. They were just as worn as what she'd been wearing, but at least they were dry. When she stepped outside, the storm had lessened slightly. She could see across the yard now, could make out the shapes of men moving between buildings with purpose. Several of them stopped to stare as she made her way toward the main house, but none approached. The kitchen was larger than she'd expected, with a massive iron stove, long wooden counters, and shelves lined with supplies. A man in his 40s with a flour-dusted apron stood at the counter, looking harried. "You the new cook?" He didn't wait for an answer. "Thank the stars. I'm Henry, foreman. Been trying to keep these animals fed, but I'm a cattleman, not a kitchen hand. Supplies are there, stove's hot. Men'll eat anything that's not burned or raw." He pulled off the apron and thrust it toward her. "They're loud, they're rough, but they work hard and they're hungry. 15 of them plus Mr. Mercer. You need anything, holler." Then he was gone, leaving Leanne alone in the kitchen with an hour until dinner and no idea what supplies she actually had to work with. She moved methodically through the shelves and cold storage, taking inventory. Flour, cornmeal, dried beans, salt pork, potatoes, onions, coffee, sugar, lard. Basic provisions, but plenty of them. Enough to work with. Her hands moved with remembered certainty, falling into rhythms her mother had taught her years ago. She built up the stove's fire, set water to boil, and began preparing what she knew would work for cold, hungry men. Thick stew with salt pork and potatoes, cornbread with a touch of sugar, strong coffee. The scents began to fill the kitchen, and with them came something Leanne hadn't felt in months. Purpose. She was stirring the stew when Caleb appeared in the doorway. He said nothing, just watched her work for a long moment. "Smells better than anything Henry made," he said finally. Leanne glanced at him. "Henry said the men are not particular." "They're not, but they'll notice good food when they get it." He paused. "You ever cook for this many before?" "My family's restaurant fed more." "In China?" "Yes." He nodded slowly. "Different food there." "Yes, but hungry is the same everywhere." Something that might have been approval crossed his face. "Men'll be in at 6. Ring the bell when it's ready." He left her to her work. At 6 o'clock exactly, Leanne rang the dinner bell mounted outside the kitchen door. The sound carried across the yard, and within minutes, men began filing into the large dining hall adjacent to the kitchen. They came in loud, stamping snow from their boots, their voices rough with the day's work and the cold. But when they saw her standing by the serving counter, the noise died to scattered murmurs. 15 pairs of eyes fixed on her. Lynn stood straighter, meeting their stares with as much dignity as she could summon. She'd faced worse than curious cowboys. She'd faced death itself just hours ago. Caleb entered last, his presence immediately commanding attention. "This is Leanne Chen," he said, his voice cutting through the silence. "She's your new cook. You'll treat her with respect, you'll eat what she makes, and you'll keep your opinions to yourself unless they're about the food." His pale eyes swept the room. "We clear?" A chorus of "yes, sir," and nodded heads. "Good. Sit down and eat." The men took their places at the 2 long tables, still quiet, still watching. Leanne began serving, ladling stew into bowls, placing cornbread on plates, pouring coffee. Her hands were steady despite the attention. The first man to taste the stew was a grizzled ranch hand with a scar across his cheek. He took a spoonful, chewed thoughtfully, then looked up at her with surprise clear on his weathered face. "This is damn good." It was like a dam breaking. The other men began to eat, and the quiet gave way to the sounds of hungry people finding satisfaction. Spoons scraped bowls, cornbread disappeared, coffee cups emptied, and were refilled. "Ma'am," one of the younger hands called out. "There more of that stew?" Leanne nodded and brought the pot to his table, refilling his bowl. "Thank you kindly," he said, his ears turning red. By the time the meal ended, the initial suspicion had softened into something more complex. Still uncertain, but warmed by full bellies and comfort food on a cold night. As the men filed out, several nodded to her. A few even said, "Good meal, ma'am." Henry, the foreman, paused on his way out. "You just made my life a whole lot easier. Welcome to the Double M." Then it was just Caleb, still seated at the head of one table, finishing his coffee. Leanne began clearing dishes, stacking them beside the wash basin. "Leave that," Caleb said. "Ethan's on cleanup tonight. That's how we rotate duties." She paused, uncertain. "You cooked. That's your job. Rest is on them." He stood, carrying his own cup and plate to the counter. "You did well tonight." "They were hungry. That made it easy." "They've been hungry for a week. Henry's been feeding them slop. They know the difference." He moved toward the door, then stopped. "You get settled in your quarters?" Tomorrow you'll cook breakfast at 5, lunch at noon, dinner at 6. Any problems? Come find me." "Mr. Mercer," Leon said quietly. He turned. "In the cabin, you asked if I was planning to freeze to death." She met his eyes. "I was not planning it, but I had accepted it. Thank you for giving me a different ending." His expression remained unreadable, but something shifted in those pale eyes. "You gave yourself a different ending. I just offered the door. You walked through it." Then he was gone, leaving Leanne alone in the kitchen with the lingering warmth of the stove and the strange, fragile feeling of being somewhere that might become safe. She finished cleaning her cooking area, banked the fire for morning, and walked back across the yard to her small room. Inside, she locked the door as Caleb had instructed, added wood to her own stove, and sat on the edge of the bed. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to imagine tomorrow, and the day after that. A string of days that might add up to something more than mere survival. Outside, the storm continued to rage. But inside these walls, Lian Chen had found something she'd thought lost forever. A chance to be more than invisible. The first week passed in a rhythm of fire and food and careful distance. Lian woke before dawn each morning, stoked the kitchen stove, and prepared breakfast for 16 hungry men. Biscuits and gravy, fried potatoes, bacon when they had it, thick slabs of bread with butter and jam when they didn't. The men ate quickly and without much talk, fueling themselves for long days of winter work, mending fences, tending cattle, clearing snow from paths and roofs. She learned their names gradually. Henry, the foreman with kind eyes and a patient manner. Ethan, the young red-haired hand who blushed whenever she looked at him. Thomas, the grizzled man with the scar who'd been the first to compliment her cooking. Miguel, quiet and competent, who spoke to the horses in soft Spanish. Ben, whose laugh was too loud, but whose work ethic was unquestionable. And then there was Jack Crawford. Jack was Caleb's age, maybe a few years older, with dark hair going gray at the temples and eyes that held resentment the way some men held grudges. Carefully, deliberately. He was the only one who never thanked her for meals, never met her eyes, never acknowledged her presence except through pointed absence. On her fourth day, she'd overheard him in the yard, his voice carrying through the kitchen window. "Don't see why we need a celestial in the kitchen. Plenty of white women who could use the work." Henry's response had been sharp. "Boss made his decision. You got a problem? Take it up with him." Jack hadn't, but his hostility simmered like a pot about to boil over. Leanne ignored him as best she could and focused on the work. Cooking was something she understood, something she could control. The rest, the stares, the whispers, the uncertain acceptance, that would sort itself or it wouldn't. She'd survived worse than unfriendly cowboys. Caleb remained a distant presence. He ate his meals without comment, worked alongside his men during the day, and disappeared into his office in the main house most evenings. He spoke to her only when necessary, always brief, always practical. "Need to slaughter a steer next week. You know how to use all the cuts?" "Yes." "Good." That was the extent of most of their conversations. But she noticed things. The way he watched his men work, assessing without hovering. The way he handled his horse, firm but never cruel. The way he'd quietly replaced her worn blanket with a newer, thicker one without saying a word about it. Caleb Mercer was not a warm man, but he was a fair one. On the 8th day, the storm that had been threatening all morning finally broke. It came down like a wall of white fury, wind shrieking across the prairie and driving snow horizontal. Within an hour, visibility had dropped to nothing. The ranch became an island in a sea of white chaos. Caleb ordered everyone inside. "No work worth dying for," he told the men. "Stay in the bunkhouse, keep the fires going. This one's going to be bad." Leon retreated to the kitchen, preparing a larger than usual dinner. If the men were confined to the bunkhouse, they'd need something substantial to keep their spirits up. She was rolling out dough for meat pies when Ethan burst through the door, his face white with panic. "Miss Chen, we need help. It's Sam. He's burning up with fever and we can't get him to wake proper." Leon's hands stilled. "Where is he?" "Bunkhouse. Mr. Mercer's with him now, but—" The boy's voice cracked. "It's bad, ma'am." She wiped her hands on her apron and followed him across the yard. The wind nearly knocked her over, snow stinging her face like needles. Ethan grabbed her arm and they pushed forward together, fighting for every step. Inside the bunkhouse, chaos reigned. Men crowded around one of the lower bunks where a young man, Sam, barely 20 from the looks of him, lay twisting beneath blankets, his face flushed scarlet and slick with sweat. Caleb knelt beside the bunk, his expression grim. He looked up when Leon entered, surprise flickering across his face. "Ethan shouldn't have brought you into this. He said the boy is sick." Leon moved closer, ignoring the stares of the men. "May I see?" Caleb hesitated, then shifted aside. Leon placed her hand on Sam's forehead and jerked it back immediately. The heat radiating from his skin was terrifying. She pulled down the blanket and saw the rash spreading across his chest, small red spots that made her breath catch. She'd seen this before. In the work camps. On the trail west. "Scarlet fever," she said quietly. The word sent a ripple of fear through the bunkhouse. Scarlet fever killed. Everyone knew that. "You sure?" Caleb's voice was tight. "Yes, my brother—" She stopped, swallowed. "I have seen it before. Doc's in town, 15 miles south. We'll never make it in this storm." "Then we treat him here." Leon looked at Caleb directly. "I will need willow bark if you have it, clean cloths, cool water, and everyone must stay back unless they have had the fever before." Jack Crawford's voice cut through from the back of the room. "You're going to let her experiment on the boy? She's not a doctor." "She's right about the fever," Thomas said quietly. "My sister had it. Looked just like that." "Then we get the doctor." "In this storm?" Caleb's voice silenced the room. "Boy'll be dead before we made it 5 miles. He looked at Leon. "You know what you're doing?" "I know what might help. I cannot promise more than that." Their eyes held for a long moment. Then Caleb stood. "Henry, get the willow bark from storage. Miguel, clean cloths and cool water. Thomas, help me move him to the annex room. More space to work, less chance of spreading it." He turned to the rest of the men. "Everyone else stay back. Leon's in charge of his care. Anyone questions that, they answer to me." Jack's face darkened, but he said nothing. They moved Sam carefully, his body limp and burning. In the small annex room, Leon directed them to lay him on the bed and strip him to his underclothes. The rash had spread further, angry red spots covering his chest and arms. "The fever will get worse before it breaks," she told Caleb. "We must keep him cool, give him willow bark tea for the pain and fever, watch that he breathes properly." "What else?" "We wait. And hope." Caleb nodded. "I'll stay with you." "You do not have to. He's my man. My responsibility. I stay." For the next 8 hours, they worked in careful coordination. Leanne brewed willow bark tea and coaxed it down Sam's throat a few drops at a time. Caleb kept the cloths cool and changed them when they grew warm from the boy's skin. They took turns monitoring his breathing, which had grown rapid and shallow. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, time became measured in breaths and heartbeats. Sometime after midnight, Sam began to convulse. "Hold him," Leanne commanded, and Caleb moved instantly, pinning the boy's shoulders to keep him from injuring himself. The seizure lasted less than a minute, but felt eternal. When it passed, Sam went limp again, his breathing even more labored. "That's bad, isn't it?" Caleb's voice was rough. "It is not good, but it is not the end." Leanne prepared more tea, her hands steady despite her exhaustion. "In the camps, some who seized still lived. We must keep trying." "You sound certain." "I am not certain of anything, but I am not ready to give up." Caleb looked at her then, really looked at her, as if seeing something he hadn't noticed before. "That stubbornness save your life on the frontier?" "Many times." "Good trait to have." They fell back into their rhythm. Hours blurred together. Leanne's back ached from bending over the bed. Her eyes burned from lack of sleep. But she didn't stop, and neither did Caleb. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, Sam's breathing changed. It steadied, deepened. The terrible heat radiating from his skin began to lessen. Leanne placed her hand on his forehead and felt the difference immediately. "The fever is breaking." Caleb leaned forward, touching the boy's cheek. Relief flooded his face. "You're sure?" "Yes. He is not safe yet, but—" She allowed herself a small smile. "He has a chance now." Caleb sat back heavily, exhaustion finally showing in the slump of his shoulders. "You saved his life." We do not know that yet. I know. His pale eyes found hers. Thank you. The simple sincerity of it caught her off guard. You would have done the same without me. Maybe, but probably not as well. He stood slowly, joints popping. You should rest. I'll watch him for a while. I am fine. Leanne. The sound of her name in his voice made her look up. You've been awake for near 20 hours. You need sleep. I'll wake you if anything changes. She wanted to argue, but exhaustion was pulling at her like a tide. 2 hours. 4. 3. His mouth almost smiled. Deal. She made it to her room and collapsed onto the bed, fully clothed. Sleep took her immediately. When she woke, pale dawn light filtered through the window. She'd slept far longer than 3 hours. She rushed back to the annex and found Caleb exactly where she'd left him, sitting beside Sam's bed. But the boy's color had improved dramatically, and his breathing was steady and deep. He woke up an hour ago, Caleb said quietly. Asked for water, drank a full cup, and went back to sleep. That is very good. Leanne moved closer, checking Sam's pulse and temperature. Both were better. The worst has passed. You were right then. This time. You sell yourself short. She looked at him in surprise. I only did what I could. That's more than most would have done. More than I could have done alone. He stood, rolling his shoulders to work out the stiffness. The men are going to want to know he's all right. Can I tell them? Yes, but he must rest for several days. Light food, plenty of water. No work for at least a week. I'll see to it. He moved toward the door but paused. That business you mentioned about your brother, he have the scarlet fever? Leanne nodded. He make it? No. Caleb's jaw tightened. I'm sorry. So am I. She looked down at Sam's sleeping face. But this one will live. That is enough for now. Yeah, Caleb said softly. It is. He left, and Leanne settled into the chair beside the bed to keep watch. Within an hour, word had spread through the ranch. Men came in small groups to look in on Sam, their faces showing relief and something else. Something that looked like respect when they glanced at Leanne. Thomas brought her a cup of coffee. Heard you stayed up all night with him. Mr. Mercer did too. Yeah, but he's the boss. He's supposed to. Thomas set down the cup. You didn't have to. Mean something that you did. Even Jack Crawford appeared, though he didn't speak. He looked at Sam, then at Lion, his expression unreadable. Then he turned and left without a word. By evening, Sam was awake enough to eat a little broth. His fever remained gone, and the rash had already begun to fade. Thank you, Miss Chen, he said weakly. Ethan told me you saved my life. You saved your own life by being strong enough to fight. Still, thank you. Caleb appeared in the doorway. How's the patient? Improving, Leanne said. Good. Means you can get back to the kitchen. Men are getting hungry, and while I appreciate your nursing skills, I still need you to cook. There was something in his tone that made her look up. Not irritation, something warmer. I will prepare dinner now. Appreciate it, he paused. After dinner, you should rest properly. That's an order. I do not take orders from you in my own time. His almost smile appeared again. Fair point. Consider it a strong suggestion, then. I will consider it. She left Sam in Caleb's capable hands and returned to the kitchen. The familiar rhythms of cooking settled over her like a comfortable coat. She prepared a hearty stew and fresh bread, simple food, but made with care. When the men filed in for dinner, the atmosphere had shifted. They still watched her, but the wariness had transformed into something closer to acceptance. Several thanked her not just for the food, but for helping Sam. After the meal, as she was cleaning up, Henry approached with an unusual expression on his weathered face. The men and I, we took a vote, he said. Not official or anything, but, well, we wanted you to know. You're one of us now, proper part of the Double M crew. Leanne stopped what she was doing. Because I helped Sam? Because you showed up when it mattered. Because you didn't quit when things got hard. That's what counts out here. He tipped his hat. Welcome to the ranch, Miss Chen. Truly. After he left, Leanne stood alone in the quiet kitchen, her hand still resting on the dish she'd been washing. One of us. She'd crossed an ocean, lost her family, survived death by cold and starvation, and found her way to this wind-battered ranch at the edge of everything. And somehow, impossibly, she'd found something more valuable than safety or wages. She'd found a place where she belonged. Outside, the storm had finally broken, and stars were beginning to show through gaps in the clouds. Leanne finished her work, banked the fire, and walked across the yard to her small room. As she passed the annex, she glanced in the window and saw Caleb still sitting beside Sam's bed, reading by lamplight, keeping watch over his man. She wondered what it must be like to inspire that kind of loyalty, to lead men who trusted you even in crisis. Then she wondered why Caleb Mercer, who could have left her to freeze in that dying cabin, had chosen instead to bring her here. Maybe someday she'd find the courage to ask him. But for now, it was enough to be warm, to be fed, to be safe, to be chosen, even if only for her skill with a ladle and a stove. She unlocked her door, stepped inside, and allowed herself to imagine what tomorrow might bring. The morning after Sam's fever broke, Leanne woke to a world transformed by snow and sunlight. The storm had passed, leaving behind drifts that reached the windowsills and a sky so blue it hurt to look at. She dressed quickly, added wood to her stove, and made her way to the kitchen through snow that crunched beneath her boots like broken glass. Inside, the kitchen was cold. She built up the fire, set coffee to brewing, and began pulling out supplies for breakfast. Her body ached from the long night of nursing Sam, but her hands moved with practiced efficiency. Biscuits, bacon, fried potatoes. Simple food for men who'd be working hard to dig out from the storm. She was rolling out biscuit dough when the kitchen door opened and Caleb walked in, snow still clinging to his coat. "Thought I'd find you here early," he said, shaking off the cold. "How'd you sleep?" "Well enough. And you?" "Not much. Checked on Sam twice during the night." He moved to the coffee pot and poured himself a cup, drinking it black and hot. "He's doing better. Ate some breakfast, complained about being bored. That's a good sign. It means he is healing." Leanne cut circles in the dough with the rim of a tin cup. "He will want to return to work too soon. You must make him rest." "Already told him he's on light duty for a week minimum." Caleb leaned against the counter, watching her work. "He grumbled about it, but he'll listen." They fell into comfortable silence, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the soft thud of dough being shaped. Leanne was aware of his presence in a way that felt different from before. Less like employer and employee, more like two people who'd shared something significant. "Can I ask you something?" Caleb's voice broke the quiet. Leanne looked up. "Yes." "That night in the cabin before I showed up, if I hadn't come, would you have just—" He stopped, seeming to search for the right words. "Would you have let it happen?" The question was more personal than anything he'd asked before. Leanne considered lying, offering some dignified version of events, but Caleb Mercer had earned honesty. "I do not know," she said quietly. "I had no plan to die, but I also had no plan to live. When you have nothing left, sometimes the difference between those two things becomes very small." He was quiet for a long moment. "What changed?" "You knocked on my door." She met his eyes. "You gave me a choice. That is not a small thing." "Just needed a cook." "Perhaps. But you could have gone to town, hired someone there. Instead, you rode 8 miles in a storm to check on an abandoned cabin." She shaped another biscuit. "Why did you do that?" Caleb looked into his coffee cup as if it held answers. "Heard in town there was a Chinese woman living alone out on the prairie. Heard she'd lost her family, had no resources. Thought I'd check, see if she needed anything." He shrugged. "Didn't expect to find you half frozen and starving." "But you came anyway." "Yeah, I did." "Why?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "Had a sister once, younger than me. When our parents died, she tried to manage on her own, too proud to ask for help. Found her too late." He set down his cup, swore I'd never walk past someone who needed help again, even if they were too stubborn to ask for it. Leanne's hands stilled on the dough. "I am sorry about your sister." Was a long time ago, but his expression said it still mattered. "Point is, I understand what it's like to be alone with no good choices. So when I heard about you, I had to check, simple as that." It is not simple at all, Lian said softly. It is kindness. Just practicality. Like I said, needed a cook. But they both knew it was more than that. The moment stretched between them, weighted with things neither seemed ready to say. Then Caleb cleared his throat and straightened. Better let you get back to work. Men'll be hungry. He moved toward the door, then paused. Thank you, Lian. For what you did for Sam, for what you're doing here. Before she could respond, he was gone. Lian stood alone in the kitchen, her hands dusted with flour, something warm and uncertain blooming in her chest. She pushed the feeling aside and returned to her work, but it lingered at the edges of her thoughts like morning light through a window. The next week settled into a new rhythm. The ranch slowly dug out from the storm's aftermath, clearing paths, checking on cattle scattered across the range, repairing damage to fences and outbuildings. The work was hard and constant, but the men approached it with renewed energy. Sam recovered fully and returned to light duties, though Caleb watched him like a hawk for any sign of relapse. And slowly, carefully, the dynamic between Lian and the ranch hands shifted further. Thomas began teaching her English phrases she didn't know, patiently correcting her pronunciation without judgment. Miguel showed her which herbs grew wild on the prairie and how to identify them. Even Ethan, who still blushed whenever she spoke to him, started leaving small kindnesses, extra firewood stacked by her door, a book he thought she might enjoy, a chair he'd repaired that had a wobbly leg. The men began to linger after meals, not rushing back to work but taking time to talk with each other and with her. They asked about her family, her journey west, what China had been like. She answered what she felt comfortable sharing, and they seemed to understand the boundaries she kept around certain memories. Only Jack Crawford remained distant. He still didn't speak to her, still carried that simmering resentment in the set of his shoulders and the hard line of his mouth. But he'd stopped making comments, stopped trying to undermine her presence. It wasn't acceptance, but it wasn't open hostility either. Lian counted it as progress. She saw Caleb less during the day. He was often out on the range, managing the recovery efforts. But their paths crossed every evening at dinner. He always ate last after the men had finished, and Lian found herself timing her kitchen work to coincide with his meal. It started accidentally. The first time she'd been cleaning up when he came in late, covered in snow and exhaustion. She'd heated up a plate for him without thinking, and he'd thanked her with genuine surprise. The second time wasn't an accident. She began to learn his preferences. He liked his coffee strong and black, his steak rare, his bread warm. He had a sweet tooth he tried to hide, but always accepted an extra slice of pie when offered. He ate quickly, but with attention, as if he genuinely noticed what he was tasting, and he started to talk to her. Not about anything profound at first. The weather, the cattle, problems with fencing, but gradually the conversations deepened. He told her about the ranch, how he'd built it from nothing over 15 years of brutal work. She told him about her family's restaurant, the rhythms of that life, what she missed about it. You ever think about going back? He asked one evening, his plate empty, his coffee cup warm between his hands. To China, I mean. Lian considered the question. Sometimes, but there is nothing there for me now. My parents are gone, the restaurant is gone. That life exists only in memory. Must be hard being so far from where you started. Perhaps. But this country is full of people far from where they started, you included. Fair point. I'm from Pennsylvania originally, came west after my parents died, looking for something different. Did you find it? He looked around the kitchen, out the window toward the dark expanse of prairie beyond. Found work, found purpose, built something that matters. He paused. But different? Yeah, I guess I found that too. Do you regret leaving? No, nothing left for me there either. His pale eyes found hers. Seems we have that in common. Perhaps that is why you understood, Lian said quietly. When you found me in that cabin, you knew what it meant to have nothing tethering you to where you were. Maybe. He finished his coffee and stood. Or maybe I just recognized someone too stubborn to quit even when quitting made sense. Is that a compliment? Might be. She almost smiled. You're not good at giving compliments, Mr. Mercer. Caleb, he said, you've been here near a month, saved one of my men's lives. Think you can call me Caleb? Caleb, she repeated, testing the name. It felt strange and right at the same time. Then you should call me Lian. Already do. Only sometimes. Other times it is Miss Chen. That's respect. I would prefer Lian. He studied her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. All right, Lian it is. The way he said her name made something flutter in her chest. She looked away, suddenly flustered. I should finish cleaning. And I should check the livestock one more time before bed. He carried his plate to the wash basin. Thank you for dinner and the company. After he left, Lian stood in the quiet kitchen, her heart beating slightly faster than normal. She told herself it was nothing, that they were simply employer and employee developing a professional rapport, but the warmth in her chest said otherwise. She pushed the thoughts aside and focused on her work. There was no room in her life for complications, especially not the kind that involved tall ranchers with pale eyes and unexpected kindness. But over the following days, the connection between them grew harder to ignore. Caleb started appearing in the kitchen at odd hours, always with some practical reason, checking supplies, discussing the next week's meals, asking her opinion on hiring another hand. But the conversations always drifted beyond business, touching on books they'd read, places they'd seen, dreams they'd once had. Lian found herself looking forward to these moments. Found herself listening for his footsteps, unconsciously timing her tasks to maximize the chance of crossing paths. She was playing a dangerous game, and she knew it. One afternoon, 3 weeks after Sam's recovery, Lian was in the cold storage sorting through root vegetables when she heard raised voices from the yard. She moved to the window and saw Jack Crawford and Miguel facing off, their postures tense. I'm sick of taking orders from some Mexican who can barely speak English, Jack was saying, his voice carrying through the cold air. Miguel's response was quiet but firm. I speak 3 languages. How many do you speak, Jack? Don't matter how many languages you know when you're too stupid to use them right. Henry appeared, stepping between them. That's enough, both of you. Back to work. Not until he apologizes for screwing up the fence line this morning. I did not screw up anything. You measured wrong and blamed me. Jack's hand moved toward his belt, and Lian's breath caught. But before anything could escalate further, Caleb's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Crawford, my office. Now. The yard fell silent. Jack's jaw tightened, but he turned and stalked toward the main house. Caleb followed, his expression harder than Lian had ever seen it. She returned to her work, but 20 minutes later, Jack emerged from the house, threw his belongings into a saddlebag, and rode off without a word to anyone. That evening, the atmosphere in the dining hall was subdued. The men ate quietly, occasionally glancing at the empty seat where Jack usually sat. Caleb appeared later than usual, his face drawn with exhaustion. He ate mechanically, barely tasting the food. When the men had gone and only the 2 of them remained, Lian brought him fresh coffee and sat across from him. You did not have to fire him because of Miguel, she said quietly. Caleb looked up, surprised. You heard that. The window was open. He sighed, rubbing his temples. Wasn't just about Miguel. Jack's been causing problems for months. The comment about Miguel was the last straw. He paused. Truth is, he had a problem with you too. Never said it to my face, but I'm not blind. I know. Doesn't bother you? I have faced worse than Jack Crawford's resentment. Maybe, but you shouldn't have to face it here. This ranch is supposed to be better than that. He looked at her directly. I want people who work here to feel safe. All of them. That includes you. The sincerity in his voice made her chest tighten. Thank you? Don't thank me for basic decency. In my experience, basic decency is rarer than you think. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Caleb spoke again, his voice quieter. Can I ask you something personal? Lian hesitated, then nodded. That first night, when I brought you here and you saw this place, what were you thinking? She considered the question carefully. I was thinking that it looked like salvation, and I was afraid that if I blinked, it would disappear. And now? Now I am still afraid sometimes, but less than before. She met his eyes. You have given me something I thought I would never have again. What's that? A place where tomorrow seems possible. Something shifted in his expression, softening the hard lines around his eyes. You've given us something too, you know. Food? More than that. You've given this place. He struggled for words. Before you came, we were just a bunch of men working hard and eating poorly and going to bed exhausted. Now it feels different, feels more like a home. The word hung between them, weighted with meaning neither seemed ready to fully acknowledge. I am glad, Leanne said finally. This place has become home to me as well. Caleb opened his mouth as if to say something more, then seemed to think better of it. He finished his coffee and stood. I should let you get some rest. Early morning tomorrow. They are all early mornings. True enough. He moved toward the door, then turned back. Leanne? Yes? I'm grateful you didn't blink that first night. Grateful you're still here. Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving her alone with the lingering warmth of his words and the accelerating rhythm of her heart. That night, lying in her bed with the stove burning low, Leanne allowed herself to examine the feelings she'd been carefully ignoring. The way her pulse quickened when Caleb entered a room. The way his rare smiles felt like gifts. The way his presence had become something she anticipated, craved, looked forward to. She was developing feelings for him. Deep, complicated, dangerous feelings. It was foolish. He was her employer. She was dependent on him for survival. Any romantic entanglement could only end in disaster and humiliation. She should focus on her work, on maintaining the safety and stability she'd found here, on not risking everything for something as uncertain as emotion. But the heart, she was learning, did not respond well to logic. The following week brought unseasonably warm weather, melting the snow and turning the ranch yard into a muddy soup. The men worked long hours repairing winter damage and preparing for spring calving season. Leanne adapted her cooking to accommodate their increased appetites, making larger portions and more substantial meals. One afternoon, she was carrying supplies from the storage shed when she slipped in the mud and nearly fell. Strong hands caught her arms, steadying her. Careful there. She looked up into Caleb's face, suddenly aware of how close they were. His hands remained on her arms, warm and solid. His pale eyes searched hers, and for a moment neither moved. Thank you, Leanne managed. Can't have you breaking your neck. Who'd feed us? It should have been a casual comment, but his voice had gone rough, and he still hadn't let go. I am certain you would manage, she said, her own voice unsteady. Don't want to manage. Want your cooking. He paused. Want you here. The admission hung between them like a held breath. Leanne's heart hammered against her ribs. She should step back, create distance, maintain propriety. Instead, she stayed exactly where she was. I want to be here, she said quietly. His hands tightened slightly on her arms. Leanne. Mr. Mercer. Ethan's voice shattered the moment. We got a cow in trouble down by the south pasture. Caleb released her immediately, stepping back. On my way. He looked at Leanne once more, something unspoken in his eyes, then turned and strode toward the barn. Leanne stood in the mud, her arms still tingling where he'd held her, her breath coming too fast. She gathered the supplies she'd dropped and made her way back to the kitchen on shaking legs. Something had changed between them. The careful distance they'd maintained had cracked, revealing the attraction beneath. And once revealed, it would be impossible to ignore. That evening, Caleb didn't come to dinner. Henry mentioned he'd gone to town for supplies and wouldn't be back until late. Leanne tried not to feel disappointed and failed completely. She cleaned up after the meal and returned to her room, but sleep eluded her. She lay awake listening to the sounds of the ranch settling for the night. Men's voices from the bunkhouse, horses shifting in the barn, the wind moving through the eaves. Sometime near midnight, she heard hoofbeats in the yard. She rose and looked out the window to see Caleb dismounting, moving with the weariness of a long ride. He unsaddled his horse, led it into the barn, then crossed the yard toward the main house. He paused halfway there and looked directly at her window. Even in the darkness, she felt the weight of his gaze. He stood there for a long moment, then continued to the house and disappeared inside. Leanne returned to bed, her heart racing. She was in dangerous territory now, and she knew it, but she also knew that she didn't want to retreat. Whatever was building between her and Caleb felt inevitable, like a river cutting through stone, patient and persistent and impossible to stop. The next morning, she woke early and made her way to the kitchen through pale dawn light. The air smelled of wet earth and new grass, spring asserting itself despite winter's reluctance to yield. She was starting the fire when Caleb appeared in the doorway, 2 cups in his hands. "Thought you might want coffee," he said. She accepted the cup, their fingers brushing in the exchange. "Thank you. How was your trip to town?" "Productive. Got the supplies we needed." He leaned against the counter, watching her work. "Also heard some news." "What kind of news?" "Railroad's coming through next year. Going to bring a lot of changes to the territory." "Is that good or bad?" "Both, probably. More people, more opportunities, but also more complications." He paused. "More people might mean you'd have other options, other places you could work if you wanted." Leon looked at him directly. "Are you asking me to leave?" "No." The word came quick and firm. "Opposite, actually. I'm asking if you want to stay." "I have already stayed. I am here." "I mean long term, not just until something better comes along." She set down her coffee cup carefully. "Do you think I am waiting for something better?" "I don't know. Are you?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications. Leon took a breath, choosing her words carefully. "When you found me in that cabin, I had given up on better. I had given up on everything except the next breath, and the one after that. You gave me more than work, Caleb. You gave me a reason to imagine a future." She met his eyes. "I'm not waiting for something better. I'm trying to build better here." His expression softened. "Good. Because I don't want you to leave, and that's not just about the cooking." "What is it about?" He was quiet for a long moment, seeming to weigh his words. "It's about how this place feels different with you in it. How the men are happier, work better, fight less. How I—" He stopped, then continued. "How I look forward to the end of the day because it means talking with you. How your opinion matters to me in ways that have nothing to do with food or work." Leon's breath caught. "Caleb, I know it's complicated. I'm your employer. You depend on this job for your survival. The last thing I want is for you to feel pressured or obligated. So I'm just going to say this once, and then we can pretend I didn't if you want." He straightened, facing her fully. "I care about you, Leon, more than I should, more than is probably wise. And if there's any chance you might feel the same, I need to know. Because keeping this professional is getting harder every day, and I don't want to make you uncomfortable." The honesty of it stole her words. She looked at this man who'd saved her life, given her purpose, treated her with respect when the world offered none. This man who was rough and practical and unexpectedly kind. This man whose presence had become essential to her sense of safety and belonging. "I feel the same," she said quietly. "I have tried not to. I have told myself it is foolish, that I am risking everything I have found here. But I cannot help how I feel when you walk into a room. I cannot help looking forward to our conversations. I cannot help—" She stopped, swallowed. "I cannot help caring for you." The words seemed to break something open in him. He crossed the distance between them in 2 strides, stopping just short of touching her. "If we do this," he said, his voice low and intense, "it has to be real. Not employer and employee. Not obligation or gratitude. Real partnership between equals. Can you accept that?" "Can you?" she countered. "Can you truly see me as equal when I depend on you for survival?" "I see you as the woman who saved one of my men's lives, who faced down a frontier winter and didn't break, who turned simple ingredients into meals that make hardened cowboys ask for seconds." He reached out slowly, giving her time to retreat, and brushed his fingers against her cheek. "I see you as someone stronger than me in ways that matter. So yeah, I can accept equals. Question is whether you can trust that I mean it." Leon leaned into his touch, closing her eyes briefly. When she opened them, she'd made her decision. "I trust you," she said. "I choose to trust you. Then we'll figure the rest out as we go." He leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't. When his lips met hers, gentle and questioning, she answered with certainty she hadn't known she possessed. The kiss was soft, careful, weighted with weeks of restrained longing. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "Been wanting to do that for a while," Caleb admitted. "How long?" "Since you told Jack Crawford's attitude didn't bother you because you'd faced worse. Watching you stand there so calm and strong, something shifted in me." Leon smiled despite herself. "For me, it was earlier. The night with Sam when you stayed beside his bed all night. when I saw how much you cared for your people. We're both fools then. Could have been doing this for weeks. Perhaps we needed the time to be certain. And are you certain? She looked at him, this man who'd given her a second chance at living, and knew her answer with absolute clarity. Yes, I am certain. He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Lan felt the last of her defenses crumble. This was dangerous and uncertain and complicated, but it was also right in ways she couldn't explain and didn't need to. When they finally broke apart, dawn had fully arrived, painting the kitchen in shades of gold and amber. We should probably talk about how this works, Caleb said, still holding her close. Don't want the men to think I'm taking advantage. They will think what they will think. We cannot control that. True, but I can make my intentions clear. You're not just my cook anymore, Leanne. He seemed to search for the right word. What am I? Mine, he said simply. If you'll have me. The possessive word should have rankled, but spoken in his rough, honest voice, it felt like a promise. Then you are mine as well, she said firmly. This goes both ways. His smile transformed his entire face. Deal. Outside, the ranch was waking up. Soon the men would be appearing for breakfast, and the day's work would begin. But for now, in this quiet moment before dawn gave way to full morning, Leanne stood in Caleb Mercer's arms and allowed herself to believe in possibilities she'd thought lost forever. She'd crossed an ocean and survived a frontier winter. She'd lost everything and found it again in unexpected forms. And now, standing in a kitchen that smelled of coffee and new beginnings, she was choosing something just for herself. Not survival, not safety. Love. The kiss changed everything and nothing at all. Leanne still woke before dawn to build fires and prepare breakfast. She still rolled out biscuit dough with practiced hands and brewed coffee strong enough to wake the dead. The men still filed into the dining hall at the same hours, ate with the same appreciation, and went about their work with the same dedication. But beneath the surface of routine, something fundamental had shifted. Caleb no longer avoided her eyes across crowded rooms. When he handed her supplies or reached past her for the coffee pot, his fingers lingered a moment longer than necessary. The brief touches became a language between them, saying things they couldn't speak aloud in front of the men. They were careful, professional. But the electricity that crackled in the air when they were in the same space was impossible to completely hide. Thomas noticed first. He said nothing directly, but one morning as Leanne was serving breakfast, he caught her eye and gave her a small, knowing smile. Not judgmental, almost approving. When Caleb entered a few minutes later and his gaze immediately found hers, Thomas's smile widened slightly before he turned back to his plate. If the other men noticed, they kept it to themselves. The unspoken rule seemed to be that what happened between the boss and the cook was nobody's business but their own, as long as the work got done and the food kept coming. The real test came 3 days after that first kiss, when a cattle buyer arrived from Billings to negotiate spring contracts. Ronald Garrett was a stout man in his 50s with shrewd eyes and an air of self-importance. He arrived in a fancy buggy with brass fittings and immediately set about inspecting the herd with the critical eye of someone used to getting his way. Leanne was preparing lunch when Caleb brought him into the dining hall. "Garrett, this is Leanne Chen, our cook. Leanne, Mr. Garrett will be joining us for lunch." Garrett's eyes swept over her, his expression shifting from surprise to something harder. "A Celestial? You're employing a Celestial as your cook?" The slur hung in the air like smoke. Leanne kept her expression neutral, but her hands tightened on the serving spoon. Caleb's voice went cold. "I employ the best cook in the territory. Her background is irrelevant." "Not irrelevant to me. I don't eat food prepared by—" "Then you won't be joining us for lunch." Caleb's tone left no room for argument. "And if that's a problem, you're welcome to conduct your business elsewhere." Garrett's face flushed. "Now see here, Mercer. I'm offering you top dollar for your cattle. You can't afford to be choosy about buyers." "I can afford to be choosy about who I break bread with." Caleb moved closer to Garrett, his posture deceptively relaxed. "My cook is part of my crew. You disrespect her, you disrespect me and every man on this ranch. So you can either apologize and eat lunch like a civilized human being, or you can ride back to Billings and we'll do business with someone else." The silence stretched taut. Every man in the dining hall had stopped eating, their attention fixed on the confrontation. Leanne stood frozen, hardly breathing. Garrett looked from Caleb to Lian and back again, clearly calculating. Finally, he cleared his throat. My apologies, Miss Chen. I spoke out of turn. It wasn't sincere, but it was something. Lian nodded once, accepting it for what it was. Lunch will be ready in 10 minutes, she said, her voice steady. Garrett sat stiffly through the meal, eating in silence while Caleb and Henry discussed cattle prices and delivery schedules. When the negotiations concluded and Garrett finally left, the tension in the dining hall released like a held breath. Henry was the first to speak. That was well handled, boss. Wasn't going to let him talk to Lian that way. Caleb's jaw was still tight with suppressed anger. We know. The men appreciate it. Henry glanced around at the others, who nodded in agreement. Just so you know, if Garrett had pushed harder, wouldn't have just been you standing up. We all would have backed you. Miguel spoke up, his English careful but clear. Miss Chen is one of us. We protect our own. The simple declaration made Lian's throat tighten with emotion. She'd spent so long being invisible, being tolerated at best and despised at worst. To be claimed as part of something, to be defended without hesitation, it was almost overwhelming. Thank you, she managed. All of you. Thomas raised his coffee cup. To the best damn cook in Montana Territory. To Lian, the others echoed, raising their own cups. After the men dispersed back to work, Caleb lingered in the kitchen while Lian cleaned up. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly. Risk losing a buyer over me. Yes, I did. He moved closer, his voice intense. I told you that you're mine to protect. That means standing up for you even when it costs me, especially when it costs me. But the ranch will survive without Garrett's money. It won't survive if I become the kind of man who lets people disrespect those under my care. He reached out and gently lifted her chin, making her meet his eyes. You're not just my employee, Lian. You're important to me. That means something out here. It means you will make enemies. Already have enemies. What's one more? Despite the seriousness of the moment, Lian almost smiled. You are very stubborn. Look who's talking, the woman who survived a winter in a dying cabin through pure stubbornness. That was desperation, not stubbornness. Same thing, sometimes. He glanced toward the door, making sure they were truly alone, then leaned down and kissed her softly. I need to get back to work. But tonight after dinner, will you walk with me? Where? Just around the ranch. Want to talk to you away from everyone else. Lian nodded, her heart quickening. I would like that. That evening, after the dishes were cleaned and the kitchen secured for the night, Lian met Caleb in the yard. The spring air was cool but not cold, carrying the scent of wet earth and growing things. Stars scattered across the sky like spilled salt. They walked in comfortable silence toward the western edge of the ranch, where a small rise gave a view of the prairie stretching endlessly into darkness. When they reached the top, Caleb stopped and looked out across his land. Sometimes I stand here and can't believe this is mine, he said quietly. 15 years ago, I had nothing but a horse, a rifle, and enough anger to fuel a dozen men. Now I have all this. You built it through hard work, and luck, and help from good people. He turned to her. And now I have you. Didn't see that coming when I rode out to that cabin. I did not see any of this coming, Lian admitted. When I left China, I thought I was coming to a place of opportunity. Then I lost everyone and everything, and I thought my story would end in that cabin. But it didn't. No, you gave me a different ending, a different beginning. Caleb reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. The simple gesture felt momentous, intimate in a way that had nothing to do with passion and everything to do with trust. I want to talk to you about something, he said. Something important. Lian's breath caught. All right. The men know there's something between us. They're not stupid, but right now it's just speculation. If we're going to continue this, I want to do it properly. I want people to know you're not just my cook or my... He struggled for words. I want them to know you're my partner in every sense of the word. What are you asking? He turned to face her fully, still holding her hand. I'm asking if you'd consider becoming my wife. The words hung in the air between them, enormous and terrifying and impossibly hopeful. Lian stared at him, her mind reeling. We have known each other only a few weeks, she said finally. I know. It's fast, maybe too fast. His grip on her hand tightened. But out here, time works differently. A week in winter can teach you more about a person than a year in comfort, and I've seen enough to know what I want. What do you want? You. Here, beside me. Not as someone who works for me or depends on me, but as someone who shares this life with me. Someone who makes this ranch feel like more than just land and cattle. He paused. I know I'm not an easy man. I'm rough around the edges, set in my ways. But I promise I'll respect you, protect you, and do everything in my power to make you happy, if you'll have me. Lien's heart hammered against her ribs. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, to grab this chance at belonging with both hands. But another part hesitated, afraid of moving too fast, of making a choice based on gratitude rather than genuine feeling. I need time to think, she said quietly. Disappointment flickered across his face, but he nodded. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. They stood in silence, still holding hands, looking out over the dark prairie. Finally, Lien spoke again. Tell me something. If I say no, what happens? Do I lose my position here? Do things become impossible between us? No, you keep your job, keep your room, keep your place on this ranch. Nothing changes except we go back to being employer and employee. I won't make things difficult for you, Lien, that's a promise. Why? Because forcing you to choose between security and honesty isn't a real choice. I want you to say yes because you want to, not because you're afraid of what happens if you say no. The answer settled something in her chest. This was why she was falling for him, not his strength or his protection, but his fundamental decency, his commitment to treating her as an equal even when the power dynamic said otherwise. I'm not going to say no, she said slowly, but I am also not ready to say yes. Not yet. What do you need? Time. To be certain this is what I want, not just what circumstances have pushed me toward. To know that I am choosing you, not choosing safety. He studied her face in the starlight. That's fair. More than fair, actually. Take your time. I'll wait. Even if it takes weeks, months? Even then. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. You're worth waiting for, Lien Chen. The tenderness of it made her eyes sting with unexpected tears. She blinked them back and squeezed his hand. Thank you for understanding. Thank you for being honest. They walked back to the ranch building slowly, neither wanting the moment to end. When they reached her door, Caleb hesitated. Can I kiss you goodnight? Yes. He leaned down and kissed her softly. No pressure or demand, just warmth and promise. When he pulled back, his eyes were gentle. Sleep well, Lien. You too, Caleb. She watched him walk across the yard to the main house, then went inside and closed the door. Alone in her small room, she sat on the edge of the bed and tried to process everything that had happened. A marriage proposal. From a man she'd known only weeks, but who'd already proven himself in ways that mattered. A chance at security, partnership, belonging. But was it enough? Was gratitude the same as love? Could she build a marriage on such uncertain foundations? She thought of her parents' marriage, arranged before they'd ever met, that had grown into genuine affection over years. She thought of the American marriages she'd observed based on romantic love that sometimes flourished and sometimes withered. There was no perfect answer, no guaranteed path. But there was Caleb, who'd saved her life and given her purpose, who defended her against men like Garrett without hesitation, who asked rather than demanded, who offered choice rather than obligation. Maybe that was enough to build on. The next morning, Lien woke with a sense of purpose. She went about her usual routines, but her mind was working through possibilities, examining her feelings from every angle. Caleb kept his distance, giving her space to think, but she caught him watching her sometimes, his expression hopeful and patient. The day was ordinary until mid-afternoon, when young Ethan came running into the kitchen, his face pale with panic. Miss Chen, there's a child at the gate. Little girl can't be more than 5 or 6. She's alone and scared, and we don't know where she came from. Lien immediately followed him outside. Near the ranch entrance, several of the men had gathered around a small figure. As Lien approached, she saw a child with tangled blonde hair and a dirty dress, clutching a ragged cloth doll and crying silently. Hey there, sweetheart, Henry was saying gently. Can you tell us your name? The girl just shook her head, tears streaming down her face. Leanne knelt beside her, making herself small and non-threatening. "Hello, little one. Are you hungry?" The girl's eyes, huge and blue and terrified, fixed on Leanne. She nodded slightly. "Would you like to come to the kitchen? I have fresh bread and jam." Another small nod. Leanne held out her hand. The girl hesitated, then placed her tiny fingers in Leanne's palm. Together they walked to the kitchen, the men following at a distance. Inside, Leanne settled the child at the table and prepared a plate of bread with butter and jam, along with a cup of milk. The girl ate ravenously, barely pausing to breathe. "What's your name?" Leanne asked softly. "Emma." The voice was barely a whisper. "That's a beautiful name. I'm Leanne. Can you tell me where your mama and papa are?" Fresh tears spilled down Emma's cheeks. "Mama's sick. Papa told me to run, said bad men were coming." Ice shot through Leanne's veins. She looked up at Caleb, who'd entered the kitchen, his expression grim. "How far did you walk, Emma?" he asked gently. "Don't know. Long time. Got dark and then light again." "Can you tell me what your papa looks like? What's his name?" "James. James Mackenzie. He has yellow hair like me and he's real tall." She clutched her doll tighter. "Is he going to find me?" Caleb exchanged glances with Henry. "We'll help find him, sweetheart. Don't you worry." But his expression told a different story. If the girl had walked through the night, she could have come from anywhere within a 15-mile radius. And if bad men were involved, her father might already be dead. "Henry, take 3 men and start searching in expanding circles from the ranch," Caleb ordered. "Look for homesteads, wagon tracks, anything that might indicate where she came from. Miguel, ride to town and report this to the sheriff. Someone's missing this child." As the men mobilized, Leanne focused on Emma. The girl had finished eating and was starting to sag with exhaustion. "Would you like to rest?" Leanne asked. "I have a nice warm bed you can sleep in." Emma's eyes filled with fresh fear. "Don't want to be alone." "Then I will stay with you. You are safe here, Emma. I promise." She carried the girl to her own room, tucked her into bed, and sat beside her, gently stroking her hair until she fell into exhausted sleep. Only then did Leanne allow herself to fully process what had happened. A child alone on the prairie. A sick mother. Bad men. The pieces added up to something terrible. Caleb appeared in the doorway, his expression softening when he saw Emma sleeping peacefully. "You're good with her," he said quietly. "She is frightened and alone. I remember how that feels." He moved into the room, careful not to wake the child. "Henry's out searching. Miguel's gone to town. All we can do now is wait. And if they find something bad, then we deal with it. But right now, this little girl is safe. That's what matters." Leanne looked down at Emma's sleeping face, so young and innocent and vulnerable. Something fierce and protective surged in her chest. "She cannot go back to danger," she said firmly. "No, she can't." Caleb knelt beside the bed. "Whatever happened to her family, we'll make sure she's cared for. I give you my word." The promise settled something in Leanne. This was the man asking her to marry him, someone who would pledge protection to a stranger's child without hesitation, someone whose first instinct was to help rather than turn away. Maybe she didn't need more time after all. "Caleb," she said quietly. He looked up at her. "Ask me again." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Are you sure?" "Ask me." He stood slowly, took her hand. "Leanne Chen, will you marry me? Will you be my partner, my wife, and help me build a life worth living?" She looked at him, at this rough, kind, stubborn man who'd given her everything when she had nothing, and spoke the truth of her heart. "Yes, I will marry you." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise. He pulled her to her feet and kissed her, careful not to wake Emma, but unable to contain his joy. When they finally broke apart, both were grinning like fools. "When?" he asked. "Soon, before I lose my courage." "You're the bravest person I know, but soon works for me." He glanced at Emma. "Though maybe after we sort out this situation." "Yes, she comes first. See? This is why I'm marrying you. Your heart's as big as the prairie." They stood together beside the sleeping child, their hands intertwined, and Leanne felt something click into place. This was right. Fast and unexpected and slightly terrifying, but right. Henry and the search party returned at dusk, their faces grave. They'd found a burned homestead 5 miles northwest, 2 bodies in the yard, a man and a woman, both dead from gunshot wounds. No sign of the attackers, Henry reported quietly, away from Emma's hearing. Looks like they ransacked the place and rode off, probably claimed jumpers or thieves. The Mackenzies didn't have much worth stealing. Caleb's jaw tightened. The sheriff know? Miguel's bringing him out in the morning. They'll investigate, but... Henry shook his head. Trail's cold by now. What about the girl? She's an orphan now. Sheriff will probably send her to the territorial orphanage in Helena. Leon, who'd been listening from the doorway, stepped forward. No. Both men looked at her. She is not going to an orphanage. She stays here. Leanne, Caleb said gently. We can't just keep her. There are laws. Then we follow the laws. We petition for custody. We adopt her. Leon's voice was fierce. But she does not go to an institution. She has lost enough. Caleb studied her face, then slowly smiled. All right, we'll talk to the sheriff tomorrow, see what it takes to keep her here. You'd do that? Henry asked. Take on a child you don't know? Why not? This ranch could use the sound of a kid's laughter. Caleb looked at Leanne. Besides, seems my future wife has already made the decision. Henry's eyebrows shot up. Future wife? Leanne agreed to marry me. Figured you all should know. A grin split Henry's weathered face. About damn time. Congratulations, both of you. He called over his shoulder to the other men. Boss is getting married. The news spread through the ranch like wildfire. Within minutes, men were appearing from the bunkhouse and barn, offering handshakes and congratulations. Even taciturn Miguel smiled and said something in Spanish that sounded like a blessing. Thomas pulled Caleb aside. You know the men'll expect a celebration. Can't just get married quiet-like. We'll figure something out, Caleb said, his arm sliding around Leanne's waist in a gesture that was both possessive and protective. Later that night, after Emma had eaten a light supper and fallen back asleep, Leanne and Caleb sat together in the kitchen, discussing their future. We'll need to add a room to the main house, Caleb said. For Emma. Can't have her sleeping in your quarters once we're married. Once we're married, I will not be sleeping in my quarters either. He grinned. True. But still, the girl needs her own space. And if she is not the only child? Caleb's eyes widened. You want more children? Someday, perhaps. If we are blessed. She looked down at her hands. I had always thought I would be a mother. Then I lost everything and believed that dream was gone. But now everything's possible again. He covered her hands with his. We'll build whatever family we're meant to have. Emma, more children if they come, whatever happens. We'll face it together. You make it sound simple. It is simple. Not easy, but simple. We commit to each other, to any children we're blessed with, to building something that matters. The rest is just details. Leanne leaned her head against his shoulder. When did you become so wise? About 2 minutes ago. Don't expect it to last. She laughed softly, and the sound seemed to fill the kitchen with warmth. Outside, the prairie wind sang through the eaves, but inside these walls, everything felt solid and safe. Tomorrow they would deal with sheriffs and legal proceedings and the practical realities of adopting an orphaned child. Tomorrow, they would begin planning a wedding and building a life together. But tonight, sitting in the quiet kitchen with Caleb's arm around her shoulders, Leanne allowed herself to simply feel grateful. She'd come to this country with nothing and lost even that. She'd nearly frozen to death in a dying cabin. She'd been reduced to accepting charity from a stranger just to survive another day. But that stranger had become something more, had become home. And now, impossibly, she was about to become a wife and possibly a mother. Was about to step into a future she'd never imagined when she boarded that ship in Guangdong Harbor all those months ago. What are you thinking? Caleb asked. That life is strange and unpredictable. That sorrow and joy are sometimes closer together than we realize. Sounds about right for the frontier. He kissed the top of her head. But I'm glad you're here to experience it with me. So am I, Leanne whispered. So am I. In the next room, Emma slept peacefully, safe and protected. Outside, the ranch settled into nighttime quiet. And in the kitchen that had become a sanctuary, Two people who'd found each other against all odds began planning the rest of their lives. The storm that had nearly killed Leanne seemed like a lifetime ago now. But she would never forget standing in that cabin doorway, looking at Caleb Mercer through the swirling snow and deciding to trust him with her life. That trust had led her here, to warmth and purpose and belonging, to love, and to a future that finally felt worth fighting for. The sheriff arrived the next morning with Miguel, a lean man in his 50s named Porter, who'd seen enough frontier tragedy to approach Emma's situation with practical compassion rather than sentiment. He interviewed Emma gently in Leanne's quarters, while Leanne stayed close, holding the girl's hand. Emma confirmed what the men had found. Her parents' homestead had been attacked by 3 men on horseback who demanded money and valuables. When her father refused, they'd shot him. Her mother had hidden Emma in the root cellar and told her to run if anything happened. "I heard Mama screaming," Emma whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Then it got real quiet. Papa told me to run before they found me, so I did. I ran and ran until I couldn't run anymore." Porter's expression remained neutral, but his jaw tightened. "You did exactly right, sweetheart. You were very brave." After the interview, he met with Caleb and Leanne in the main house office. "Girl's testimony matches what we found at the homestead," Porter said. "Claim jumpers, most likely. Mackenzie's filed a land patent last year, had a good water source on their property. Some men see opportunity in taking what others have built." He shook his head. "We'll investigate, but chances of catching them are slim. They've got a day's head start and could be anywhere by now." "What about Emma?" Leanne asked. "Territorial law says orphans go to the orphanage in Helena unless suitable family can be found. I'll check if the Mackenzies had any relatives, but based on what I know, they came out here alone." He looked between Caleb and Leanne. "Miguel mentioned you two might be interested in taking her in." "We are," Caleb said firmly. "We want to adopt her if that's possible." Porter studied them both. "You understand what you're taking on? A traumatized child who just lost her parents violently. That's not a simple thing." "We understand," Leanne said quietly. "I know what it means to lose everything. I will not let her face that alone." "And you're getting married?" Miguel said. "In 2 weeks," Caleb confirmed. Porter leaned back in his chair, considering. "Under normal circumstances, I'd say single individuals can't adopt. But if you're married, that changes things. Court would look favorably on a stable couple with means willing to take in an orphan." He paused. "I'll need to file paperwork, get a judge's approval. Could take a few weeks." "And in the meantime," Leanne asked, "Emma stays here under temporary custody. I'll need to verify the ranch is suitable, but from what I can see, it's better than most homes in the territory." He stood. "Get married, show you can provide a stable home, and I'll recommend the adoption to Judge Harrison. He's a reasonable man, lost his own daughter years back. He'll understand wanting to give this girl a second chance." After Porter left, Caleb and Leanne sat in the office, the weight of their new responsibility settling over them. 2 weeks, Caleb said. "That doesn't give us much time to plan a wedding." "We do not need much, just something simple." "The men will want a celebration. They work hard, don't get many chances to cut loose." Leanne smiled slightly. "Then we give them one. But the ceremony itself should be small, just us and the witnesses we need." "Who do you want there?" She thought about it. "Henry, as your best man. Thomas, Miguel, the men who have become family. And Emma. Yes, she should see that she has a new family now, that she belongs." Caleb reached across the desk and took her hand. "You're already thinking like a mother." "I am terrified of being a mother. I have no experience with children." "Neither do I. We'll figure it out together." Over the next days, the ranch transformed into something resembling organized chaos. The men threw themselves into wedding preparations with unexpected enthusiasm. Thomas and Miguel built an arbor from fresh-cut pine and decorated it with early wildflowers. Ethan cleaned the main house from top to bottom. Henry rode to town for supplies and returned with fabric for a dress, though he blushed furiously when presenting it to Leanne. "Don't know much about women's fashion," he admitted, "but the shopkeeper said this blue would suit you." The fabric was simple cotton in a soft blue-gray, nothing fancy but beautiful in its simplicity. Leanne ran her fingers over it, touched by the gesture. "It is perfect. Thank you, Henry." She spent her evening sewing the dress by lamplight, Emma curled beside her on the bed, watching with wide eyes. "You're getting married to Mr. Mercer?" Emma asked one night. "Yes." "And then I'll stay here? With you?" "If you want to. Would you like that?" Emma nodded solemnly. "I like it here. The men are nice, and you make good food. And Mr. Mercer has kind eyes. He does, doesn't he?" "My papa had kind eyes, too." Emma's voice went small before the bad men came. Leanne set down her sewing and pulled the girl into her arms. "I know you miss your papa and mama. That will never go away completely. But you can miss them and still be happy here. Those two things can exist together." "How do you know?" "Because I miss my family too. My parents, my brother. They are gone, but I carry them with me. And now I am building a new family, but that does not mean I forget them." Emma was quiet for a long moment. "Will you be my new mama?" The question hit Leanne with unexpected force. She blinked back sudden tears and held Emma closer. "I would be honored to be your mama, if that is what you want. I want that." Emma's small arms tightened around Leanne's waist. "I want you and Mr. Mercer to be my new family." "Then that is what we will be." That night, after Emma fell asleep, Leanne sat alone with her sewing and let herself cry. For Emma's loss and her own. For parents who would never see her married or meet the child she was about to raise. For all the pain that had led her to this moment. But also for the strange mercy of it all. How suffering had carved out space in her heart for this orphaned girl. How loss had made her capable of understanding what Emma needed in ways someone untouched by tragedy never could. She finished the dress 2 days before the wedding and tried it on in the privacy of her quarters. The simple cut flattered her figure, and the blue-gray brought out the warmth in her skin. She'd never imagined herself as a bride, had given up on such dreams during those desperate months after losing her family. Now here she stood, wearing a wedding dress made with her own hands, about to marry a man she'd known mere weeks, but trusted with her life. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, the spring sky impossibly blue. Leanne woke early, her stomach fluttering with nerves. Emma stirred beside her, rubbing her eyes. "Is it today?" the girl asked sleepily. "Yes. Today I marry Caleb." "Are you scared?" "A little, but also happy." "Me too." Emma sat up. "Can I help you get ready?" They spent the morning together, Emma chattering excitedly while Leanne bathed and dressed. The girl had picked wildflowers the day before, and now she wove them into Leanne's dark hair with surprising skill. "Mama used to do this for the ladies in town," Emma explained. "She taught me before." She stopped, her small face crumpling. Leanne knelt and took her hands. "Your mama would be so proud of you. You are helping make this day beautiful." Emma sniffled and nodded, then returned to her task with renewed focus. By noon, everything was ready. The arbor stood in the yard, decorated with pine boughs and flowers. The men had cleaned up, wearing their Sunday best, which for most meant clean shirts and pants without holes. Henry had even trimmed his beard. Caleb waited by the arbor in a dark suit Leanne had never seen him wear, his hair combed back, his expression nervous. When he saw her walking toward him with Emma at her side, his face transformed with wonder. "You look beautiful," he said when she reached him. "You clean up well yourself. Wasn't sure you'd actually go through with it." Having second thoughts? Not even one. He took her hands, his grip warm and steady. "You ready for this?" "Yes." "Are you?" "More than ready." The ceremony was brief, conducted by a traveling minister Henry had found in town. The words were traditional and simple, binding them together in the eyes of the territory and whatever higher power might be watching. When the minister asked if anyone objected, the silence was absolute except for the prairie wind. "Then by the power vested in me by Montana Territory, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Caleb leaned down and kissed her gently, and the men erupted in cheers and whistles. Emma clapped her hands together, bouncing on her toes with excitement. It was done. Leanne Chen was now Leanne Mercer, wife to a rancher, stepmother to an orphaned girl, and part of something larger than herself. The celebration that followed was raucous and joyful. The men had prepared a feast, taking over the kitchen for once, and producing food that ranged from excellent to barely edible. Nobody cared. There was music from a fiddle Thomas produced from somewhere, and dancing in the yard as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and gold. Caleb danced with Leon, his movements awkward but earnest. Then he danced with Emma, lifting her onto his feet so she could stand on his boots while he waltzed her around. The girls' laughter rang across the yard, bright and clear and utterly joyful. Watching them, Leanne felt her heart swell almost painfully. This was her family now. This rough rancher and this traumatized child. This collection of hard-working men who'd accepted her when the world said she didn't belong. As darkness fell and the celebration showed no signs of slowing, Caleb caught Leanne's hand and pulled her away from the crowd. "Where are we going?" she asked. "To our room. Figured we could use some privacy on our wedding night." He led her to the main house, to a bedroom she'd only glimpsed before. Someone, probably Ethan, had filled it with candles and wildflowers. The bed was made with fresh linens, and a fire crackled in the fireplace. "Emma?" Leanne asked. "Henry's got her for the night. She's sleeping in the annex with a promise of pancakes in the morning." Caleb closed the door behind them, then turned to face her. "It's just us now." Suddenly nervous, Leanne moved to the window and looked out at the celebration still going strong in the yard below. "They seem happy," she said. "They are. Been a long time since this ranch had something to celebrate." He moved behind her, his hand settling on her shoulders. "You're scared." "A little." "Of me?" "Of disappointing you." He turned her to face him, his expression gentle. "Leanne, you could never disappoint me. You've already given me more than I ever expected to have." He cupped her face in his calloused hands. "We don't have to rush this. We have all the time in the world." "I want this," she said quietly. "I want you. I am just uncertain of how to proceed." A small smile tugged at his lips. "Then we'll figure it out together, same as everything else." He kissed her slowly, thoroughly, and Leanne felt her nervousness begin to fade. This was Caleb, who'd saved her life and given her purpose, who'd defended her honor and proposed marriage and promised to build a life with her. There was nothing to fear here. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "Better?" Caleb asked. "Much better." "Good. Because I've been wanting to do this for weeks." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Leanne surrendered to the moment, to the warmth of his hands and the solid strength of his body and the promise of the life they were building together. The celebration outside continued into the night, but inside the quiet bedroom, Caleb and Leanne discovered each other with patience and tenderness, building intimacy one careful touch at a time. Later, lying in his arms with the candles burned low and the ranch settling into quiet, Leanne felt a peace she'd never known before. "What are you thinking?" Caleb asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "That I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." "Took you long enough to get here," she smiled against his chest. "Some journeys are worth the struggle." "Can't argue with that." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "Sleep now. Tomorrow starts the rest of our lives." But sleep was elusive. Leanne's mind was too full of everything that had happened, everything that still lay ahead. After a while, she spoke into the darkness. "Caleb?" "Hmm?" "When the adoption papers are finalized, I want to make sure Emma knows she has a choice, that she can keep her parents' name if she wants, or take ours, whatever makes her feel most comfortable." "That's generous of you." "It is not generosity, it is respect. Her parents loved her, provided for her. She should not have to erase them to become part of our family." He was quiet for a moment. "You're going to be an excellent mother." "I hope so. I am still terrified." "Good. Means you understand the responsibility." He pulled her closer. "But you won't do it alone. We're partners now, remember? In everything." "In everything," she echoed. They drifted to sleep as husband and wife, the first night of countless nights to come. Morning arrived with Emma bursting into their room at dawn, apparently released from Henry's supervision earlier than planned. "Are you married now?" she demanded, bouncing on the edge of the bed. Caleb groaned. "Yes, sweetheart, very married, which means you need to learn about knocking before entering rooms." "Henry said I should come get you for breakfast. He made pancakes, but they're not as good as Mama Leanne's." Leanne's breath caught at the title. Mama Leanne. The girl had claimed her completely, with the easy certainty of childhood. "Then I suppose I should make some proper pancakes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. They dressed and went down to the kitchen together, and life on the ranch continued with a new shape. Leanne cooked breakfast while Caleb organized the day's work, and Emma chattered about everything and nothing. The men congratulated them again, then dispersed to their duties. The week following the wedding fell into new rhythms. Leanne moved her belongings from the small annex to the main house, transforming Caleb's Spartan bedroom into something warmer and more lived in. Emma claimed the room they'd prepared for her with delight, hanging her cloth doll on a hook by the bed and arranging her few possessions with care. The adoption paperwork moved through the territorial system with surprising speed. Sheriff Porter kept his word, and Judge Harrison scheduled a hearing for 3 weeks after the wedding. "Just a formality," Porter assured them. "You've provided a stable home, the girl's thriving, and there are no competing claims. Judge will sign the papers and Emma becomes legally yours." But 2 days before the hearing, trouble arrived in the form of 3 riders at the ranch gate. Henry came to find Caleb in the barn, his expression grim. "Boss, we got visitors, and they're not friendly." Caleb immediately went to investigate, with Leanne following despite his protests. At the gate, 3 rough-looking men sat their horses, their clothes dusty from travel, their eyes hard and assessing. The leader was a scarred man in his 40s, with a Confederate cavalry coat and a pistol worn low on his hip. He studied the ranch with the calculating gaze of someone pricing stolen goods. "Help you, gentlemen?" Caleb asked, his tone neutral, but his posture tense. "Looking for work," the man said. "Heard this ranch might be hiring hands." "You heard wrong. We're fully staffed." "That's unfortunate." The man's eyes drifted across the yard, taking in the buildings, the livestock, the men who'd begun to gather. "Nice spread you got here. Must have a good water source." "We do, and we plan to keep it." Something shifted in the air, growing taut with unspoken threat. The scarred man smiled, showing yellowed teeth. "Wasn't suggesting otherwise. Just making an observation." He tipped his hat mockingly. "We'll be moving along then. Good day to you." The 3 men rode off slowly, taking their time, making it clear they weren't intimidated or in any hurry. After they disappeared over the rise, Henry spoke quietly. "Those were the men." "What men?" Leanne asked. "The ones who killed Emma's parents." "I'd bet my life on it." Caleb's jaw tightened. "You recognize them?" The leader had a scar across his cheek in the shape of a hook. Same description Emma gave the sheriff. Henry's hand rested on his gun. "They came here looking for the girl." Ice shot through Leon's veins. "How would they know she is here?" "Small territory. Word travels. Someone mentions a little blonde girl at the Mercer Ranch, and they put it together." Caleb turned to Henry. "Double the night watch. Nobody works alone until this is resolved. And someone's with Emma every minute she's not in the main house." You think they'll come back?" "I know they will. Emma's a witness to murder. They can't afford to let her live." Fear clawed at Leon's throat. "We should send her away. Somewhere safe." "Nowhere's safe if they're determined to find her, and running just tells them they've got us scared." Caleb's expression hardened. "This is our land, our family. We make our stand here." That night, Caleb met with all the men in the bunkhouse. Leanne stayed in the main house with Emma, who sensed the tension but didn't understand its source. "Why is everyone acting funny?" the girl asked. "Just some business to handle," Leanne said, trying to keep her voice calm. "Nothing for you to worry about." But worry ate at her through the long evening. When Caleb finally returned, his face was set in grim lines. "The men are with us," he said. "Whatever comes, we face it together. What if they attack? Then we defend what's ours." He pulled her into his arms. "I won't let them hurt Emma. Or you, I swear it." But promises couldn't stop bullets, and fear made a poor shield against violence. The attack came 3 nights later, in the darkest hours before dawn. Leanne woke to the sound of gunfire and men shouting. Caleb was already out of bed, pulling on clothes and grabbing his rifle. "Stay here with Emma," he ordered. "Lock the door and don't open it for anyone but me or Henry." Then he was gone, running toward the sound of chaos. Leanne raced to Emma's room and found the girl sitting up in bed, her eyes huge with terror. "What's happening?" "Come with me. Quickly." She pulled Emma into their bedroom and locked the door, then positioned them in the corner farthest from the window. Outside, the gunfire continued, punctuated by shouts and the sound of breaking glass. Emma buried her face in Leon's shoulder, sobbing. "It's the bad men. They found me." "Shh. You are safe. Caleb will protect us." But even as she said it, doubt gnawed at her. 3 armed killers against ranch hands who were cowboys, not gunfighters. The odds weren't good. More gunfire. A man screaming. Then an ominous silence. Leon held Emma tighter, barely breathing, listening for any sound that might indicate who'd won. Footsteps on the stairs. Heavy boots approaching the bedroom. "Leanne, it's me. Open up." Caleb's voice. She nearly collapsed with relief. She unlocked the door and he stepped inside, his face blackened with gunpowder, blood on his sleeve. But he was alive and whole. "Is everyone all right?" Leon asked. "Miguel took a bullet in the shoulder, but he'll live. Thomas got grazed. Otherwise, we're fine." "And the attackers?" "2 dead. The leader escaped on horseback, but Henry wounded him. We'll track him at first light." Caleb knelt beside Emma, his expression gentle despite the violence he'd just survived. "You're safe now, sweetheart. The bad men can't hurt you anymore." "You promise?" "I promise. And tomorrow the sheriff's coming to make sure of it." Emma threw her arms around his neck, and Caleb held her carefully, mindful of his bloody sleeve. Over her head, his eyes met Leon's, and she saw the fierce protectiveness there. This was her family, her husband who'd defended their home against killers, her daughter who'd survived more trauma than any child should face, her ranch hands who'd risked their lives without hesitation. They'd been tested and hadn't broken. As dawn broke over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Leon stood with Caleb and Emma on the porch of the main house. The danger had passed, leaving behind damage that could be repaired and wounds that would heal. But more importantly, it had revealed what they'd built here. Not just a ranch, but a community. Not just employment, but family. Sheriff Porter arrived with a deputy by mid-morning, collected the bodies, and organized a posse to track the escaped killer. Judge Harrison, hearing about the attack, expedited the adoption hearing and signed the papers without requiring their presence. Emma was legally theirs now. Emma Mercer, daughter to Caleb and Leanne, protected by the full weight of territorial law and the fierce love of her new parents. That evening, with the crisis finally past, the 3 of them sat together in the kitchen. Emma was drawing pictures at the table while Leon prepared dinner and Caleb reviewed ranch accounts. It was utterly ordinary, utterly domestic, utterly perfect. "Mama?" Emma said, not looking up from her drawing. "Yes, sweetheart?" "I'm glad the bad men didn't win. I'm glad I get to stay here with you and Papa." The casual use of those titles, Mama and Papa, made Leanne's eyes sting with tears. She exchanged glances with Caleb, who looked equally affected. "So are we, Emma," he said gruffly. "So are we." The weeks following the attack settled into a cautious normalcy. Sheriff Porter's posse tracked the escaped killer, a man named Silas Crane, to the Canadian border where the trail went cold. Porter believed Crane had fled the territory entirely, but he cautioned them to remain vigilant. "Men like that don't forget," he said. "Keep your guard up, especially where the girl's concerned." So they did. The ranch maintained double watches for another month, and Emma was never allowed outside without an adult nearby. But gradually, as spring deepened into early summer with no sign of trouble, the tension began to ease. Emma was thriving. The nightmares that had plagued her first weeks at the ranch came less frequently now, and her laughter had returned in full force. She followed Leanne around the kitchen, learning to knead bread and crack eggs. She shadowed Caleb during ranch work, pestering him with endless questions about cattle and horses and why the sky was blue. "That child talks more than all my ranch hands combined," Caleb said one evening, but his tone was affectionate. "She is making up for lost time," Leanne replied. "She was silent for so long after losing her parents. Now she feels safe enough to be a child again." "You did that. Made her feel safe." "We did that. Together." The partnership between them had deepened in ways Leanne hadn't anticipated. Caleb consulted her on ranch decisions, valuing her perspective on everything from hiring new hands to purchasing breeding stock. She learned the rhythms of cattle ranching, understanding the cycles of calving and market prices, and the constant negotiation with weather and circumstance. They were building something together. Not just a marriage, but a true partnership where both voices mattered equally. One morning in late June, Leanne woke feeling unusually tired and slightly nauseous. She dismissed it as a consequence of the previous night's heavy meal, but when the feeling persisted for several days, a different possibility began to take shape. She said nothing to Caleb at first, not wanting to raise hopes that might prove unfounded. But when her monthly courses failed to arrive and the nausea continued, she sought out Henry's wife Martha, who lived in town but occasionally visited the ranch. "Could be you're expecting," Martha said after listening to Leon's symptoms. "How long since your last courses?" "Nearly 2 months." "And you're recently married?" Leon nodded. Martha smiled warmly. "Then I'd say congratulations are in order. You should see the doctor to be certain, but it sounds like you'll be giving Emma a brother or sister come winter." The news hit Leanne with surprising force. A baby. Her baby. Caleb's baby. After everything she'd lost, after believing that part of life was closed to her forever, she was going to become a mother, not just to Emma, but to a child of her own blood. She rode to town the next day with Caleb on a supply run and confirmed the pregnancy with the territorial doctor. When she emerged from his office, Caleb was waiting outside, his expression concerned. "Everything all right?" "Everything is perfect." She took his hand and pulled him around the corner away from the busy street. "Caleb, I am with child. The doctor says I'm about 2 months along." For a moment he just stared at her, processing. Then a grin spread across his face, so wide it transformed him. "A baby? We're having a baby?" "Yes." He swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests that he'd make her dizzy. When he finally set her down, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "I never thought... After my sister died, I figured I'd never have family, never have children, and now I have you and Emma, and soon a baby." His voice cracked. "How did I get this lucky?" "We got this lucky," Leon corrected. "Together." They kept the news quiet for a few more weeks, wanting to be certain before making announcements. But eventually Emma noticed Leon's changing body and asked with the blunt curiosity of childhood why Mama's belly was getting bigger. Leanne and Caleb sat her down that evening and explained as gently as possible that she would be getting a baby brother or sister. Emma's eyes went wide. "A real baby that I can hold and play with?" "Eventually," Caleb said. "Babies are very small and fragile at first. But yes, when the baby's big enough, you can help take care of it." "Will the baby be my real brother or sister, even though we have different first parents?" Leon knelt in front of her. "You will be this baby's real sister in every way that matters. Family is not just about blood, Emma. It is about love and choice and commitment. This baby will be lucky to have you as a sister." Emma threw her arms around Leon's neck. "I'm going to be the best big sister ever, I promise." The men reacted to the news with characteristic enthusiasm. Henry produced a hand-carved cradle that had held his own children. Miguel gifted them a beautiful blanket his mother had woven. Even taciturn Thomas unbent enough to offer congratulations and practical advice about sleepless nights. As Leanne's pregnancy progressed through the summer, the ranch adapted around her changing capabilities. She could no longer handle the heaviest cooking tasks, so the men rotated through kitchen duty, learning to prepare basic meals under her direction. Emma appointed herself Leon's personal assistant, fetching things and helping with lighter tasks. Caleb became almost comically protective. He tried to prevent Leon from lifting anything heavier than a wooden spoon, hovering whenever she climbed stairs, and suggesting she rest approximately every 15 minutes. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she finally told him after he'd attempted to carry her to bed for the 3rd time in a week. "I know, but you're carrying something precious. Can't help wanting to protect you both." His tenderness touched her even as his overprotectiveness drove her to distraction. She compromised by accepting help when genuinely needed and firmly refusing it when she was perfectly capable. In August, a letter arrived from the territorial government that changed everything. Caleb read it twice, then handed it to Leon without comment. It was a formal notice that the land patent on the former Mackenzie homestead had been voided due to the deaths of the patent holders. The property, including its valuable water rights, would be auctioned to the highest bidder in 60 days unless a claim was filed by next of kin. "Emma is next of kin," Leon said slowly. "As her adopted parents, we could file claim on her behalf." "We could, but is that the right thing to do? That land represents her parents' dreams, their work, their deaths." Caleb's expression was troubled. "Feels wrong to profit from tragedy." We would not be profiting. We would be preserving something for Emma. When she is grown, she could decide what to do with it, sell it, work it herself, or gift it to someone who needs it. He considered this. You're right. The choice should be hers when she's old enough to make it. They filed the necessary paperwork, claiming the Mackenzie homestead on Emma's behalf as her legal guardians. The process required multiple trips to town, meetings with lawyers, and testimony before Judge Harrison about their intentions. You're good people, Harrison told them after approving the claim. That girl's lucky to have you, and this way her parents' legacy isn't lost. It's preserved for when she needs it. The homestead itself was in poor condition after months of abandonment and the violence that had taken place there. Caleb organized a work party to repair the worst damage, making it suitable for a tenant who could work the land and maintain the buildings until Emma came of age. Leanne accompanied him on one of these trips, curious to see the place where Emma's first family had tried to build their future. The burned sections had been cleared away, and new timber was going up under Thomas's capable direction. It was a good piece of land with a creek running through it and rich soil for crops. Her parents chose well, Caleb said, surveying the property. With proper management, this could support a family comfortably. Perhaps one day Emma will bring her own family here, continue what her parents started. Maybe. Or maybe she'll want nothing to do with it. Either way, the choice will be hers. As they stood on the small rise overlooking the homestead, Leanne felt the weight of all the lives that had intersected on this piece of prairie. Emma's parents, who died defending their dream. The killers, two of whom were buried in the town cemetery, and one who'd fled into exile. Her own family, an ocean away, whose losses had set her on the path that led here. And the new family she was building, rooted in this harsh but beautiful land. Everything was connected. Grief and joy, loss and love, endings and beginnings. Fall arrived with cooler temperatures and the hard work of preparing for winter. Leanne's pregnancy had progressed well, and the doctor predicted the baby would arrive in late December or early January. She moved more slowly now, her belly prominent beneath the loose dresses she'd sewn to accommodate her changing shape. Emma was endlessly fascinated by the baby, pressing her ear to Leanne's stomach to listen for movement and chattering about all the things she'd teach her new sibling. What if the baby is a boy? Caleb asked, amused. Then I'll teach him too. Boys need to know things just like girls. Can't argue with that logic. One evening in October, as they sat together in the main house after dinner, Emma asked a question that had clearly been weighing on her mind. Mama, when the baby comes, will you still love me the same? Leanne set down her mending and pulled Emma close. Listen to me, sweetheart. Love does not divide. It multiplies. Loving this baby will not make me love you less. My heart is big enough for both of you. You promise? I promise. You are my daughter, Emma. You were the first child of my heart, and nothing will ever change that. Emma relaxed against her, reassured. But the question had revealed a vulnerability Leanne hadn't fully appreciated. Emma had lost one family already. The fear of losing another or being displaced within it was natural and needed to be addressed with more than words. Over the following weeks, Leanne made special time for Emma, teaching her to cook more complex dishes and sharing stories about her own childhood in China. Caleb took Emma on longer rides around the ranch, teaching her to rope and showing her the landmarks that defined their land. They were building Emma's sense of security, brick by brick, memory by memory. The first snow fell in November, light and delicate. By December, winter had settled in earnest, transforming the prairie into a white expanse broken only by fence lines and huddled buildings. Leanne's pregnancy had reached its final weeks. She moved carefully now, her back aching and her sleep interrupted by the baby's increasingly vigorous movements. The doctor had warned that winter births could be complicated, urging Caleb to bring her to town when labor began. But on a bitter cold night in late December, when the temperature plummeted and wind howled across the prairie, Leanne's water broke 3 weeks earlier than expected. Caleb took one look at her face and made a decision. We're not making it to town in this weather. Henry, ride for the doctor if you can. If not, fetch Martha. We'll need someone who's done this before. Henry bundled up and disappeared into the storm. Caleb helped Leanne to their bedroom and tried to hide his panic behind a calm exterior. You're going to be fine, he told her. Everything's going to be fine. I know. Leanne gripped his hand through the first contraction. I am not afraid. But she was. Not of the pain or the process, but of the vulnerability of bringing new life into a world that could be cruel and random, of loving something so completely that its loss would destroy her. Emma appeared in the doorway, her eyes wide with concern. "Is the baby coming?" "Yes, sweetheart," Leanne managed. "Soon you will meet your brother or sister." "Can I stay?" Caleb started to refuse, but Leanne caught his arm. "Let her stay. She should be part of this." So Emma settled in a chair near the window, clutching her cloth doll and watching with solemn attention as Leanne labored through the night. Henry returned after an hour, covered in snow and shaking his head. "Can't reach town. Roads are completely blocked. But I found Martha at the Henderson place. She's on her way." Martha arrived 30 minutes later, bringing practical competence and reassuring calm. She'd delivered dozens of babies over her years on the frontier and approached Leanne's labor with matter-of-fact efficiency. "First babies take their time," she told Caleb, who looked ready to climb the walls with helpless concern. "Make yourself useful and keep that fire going strong. We'll need hot water and clean cloths." The labor progressed through the long hours of night. Leanne walked when she could, rested when she couldn't, and endured the increasing intensity of contractions with gritted determination. Caleb stayed close, offering water and words of encouragement, his own fear carefully hidden. Emma dozed in her chair, waking periodically to check on Leanne before drifting off again. As dawn approached, the contractions intensified to the point where Leanne could no longer speak through them. Martha examined her and nodded with satisfaction. "Nearly there. When the next contraction comes, you'll need to push." What followed was the hardest work Leanne had ever done. Harder than surviving that winter in the cabin. Harder than leaving her homeland for an uncertain future. Her body demanded everything she had, and she gave it willingly, drawing on reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed. Caleb held her hand through it all, his grip almost as tight as hers, his voice steady with encouragement even as worry etched deep lines around his eyes. And then, as the first light of dawn painted the snow-covered prairie in shades of pink and gold, a baby's cry filled the room. "It's a boy," Martha announced, quickly cleaning and wrapping the infant before placing him in Leanne's arms. A healthy, strong boy. Leanne looked down at her son, this tiny person who'd grown beneath her heart for 9 months, and now lay against her chest, and felt something fundamental shift in the universe. The love was immediate and overwhelming, fierce in its protective intensity. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." Caleb's face, when she looked up at him, was wet with tears he made no attempt to hide. "He's perfect. You're perfect. I can't believe—" His voice broke. "I can't believe this is real." Emma climbed onto the bed carefully, peering at her new brother with wide eyes. "He's so small. Can I touch him?" "Gently," Leanne said, guiding Emma's hand to rest on the baby's downy head. Emma's expression filled with wonder. "Hi, baby brother. I'm your big sister Emma. I'm going to protect you and teach you everything I know." The baby's eyes, dark and unfocused, seemed to find Emma's face. His tiny fist curled around her finger. "He likes me," Emma breathed. "Of course he does," Caleb said, his voice rough with emotion. "You're his sister." Martha finished her work with quiet efficiency, checking both Leanne and the baby before declaring everything satisfactory. "You did well, Leanne. He's a strong, healthy boy. What will you name him?" Leanne looked at Caleb. They'd discussed names, but never settled on one definitively. "James," Caleb said softly, looking at Emma. "After your first father. If that's all right with you, Emma." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Really? You'd name him after my papa?" "Your papa was a brave man who loved his family and died protecting them. That's a good legacy for a boy to carry." Emma threw her arms around Caleb's neck, crying into his shoulder. "Thank you, Papa. Thank you." Leanne's own tears came then, overwhelmed by the rightness of it all. This was family. Not perfect or uncomplicated, but real and true, built from pieces of different lives, different losses, different loves, all woven together into something new and strong. "James Mercer," she said, testing the name. "It suits him." The baby, James, made a small sound, as if in agreement. The ranch received the news of James's birth with celebration despite the ongoing storm. The men passed around cigars Caleb had been saving for the occasion, and raised toast to the newest member of the Double M family. Over the following weeks, as winter held the prairie in its grip, the Mercer household settled into the exhausting rhythms of caring for a newborn. James proved to be a relatively easy baby, sleeping in manageable stretches and nursing well. Emma took her role as big sister seriously, helping with diaper changes and singing to him when he fussed. Leanne had worried about being isolated with a newborn through the worst of winter, but the ranch community rallied around them. Martha visited regularly, bringing advice and reassurance. The men took over most of the cooking, presenting Leanne with meals that ranged from surprisingly good to comically inedible. Henry's wife sent care packages from town whenever the roads were passable. And through it all, Caleb proved himself to be a devoted father. He walked the floor with James during difficult nights, changed diapers without complaint, and looked at his son with an expression of wonder that never quite faded. "Never thought I'd have this," he told Leanne one night, holding James while she rested. "A wife, children, a real family. Thought that part of life had passed me by." "Did you want it before you met me?" "Didn't let myself want it. Seemed safer that way." He looked down at James, who'd fallen asleep in his arms. "But then you knocked on my door." "Well, I knocked on yours, but you know what I mean. And everything changed." "I knocked on death's door," Leanne said quietly. "You gave me a different door to walk through." "We gave each other that. I was just existing before you came, going through the motions. Now I'm living." The vulnerability in his voice touched her deeply. Caleb rarely spoke this openly about his emotions, preferring action to words. But fatherhood had cracked something open in him, revealing depths of feeling he usually kept hidden. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too. More than I have words for." James stirred in his arms, making small sounds. Caleb shifted him gently, natural and confident in a way that would have seemed impossible months ago. They were parents now, partners in the truest sense, building a life that honored both their pasts and their shared future. Spring arrived slowly, winter reluctant to release its grip. But eventually the snow melted, revealing the prairie renewed and ready for another cycle of growth. The ranch emerged from winter in good condition, losses minimal, the herd healthy. Emma celebrated her 7th birthday in April with a small party attended by ranch hands and a few families from neighboring properties. She'd grown taller over the winter, more confident, her nightmares almost completely gone. The trauma of losing her first parents would always be part of her story, but it no longer defined her completely. James thrived, growing chubby and alert, his dark eyes watching everything with intense curiosity. He smiled early and often, particularly when Emma sang to him or when Caleb made silly faces. One evening in May, as spring settled fully across the prairie and new calves dotted the pastures, Lion stood on the porch of the main house watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Emma was in the yard playing with a new puppy Miguel had given her. James slept in Caleb's arms while he sat in the rocking chair beside Leanne. "You look contemplative," Caleb observed. "I am thinking about journeys, about how we never know where we will end up when we begin." "Regretting yours?" "Not for a moment, but marveling at it. When I left China, I thought I was leaving everything behind forever. In some ways I was, but I was also walking toward something I could never have imagined." She gestured to the ranch, to Emma playing in the yard, to James sleeping peacefully. "This, all of this. Think you would have chosen this path if you'd known where it led?" She considered the question seriously. "I do not know. The grief and loss were terrible. I would not wish them on anyone. But they led me here, to you and Emma and James. So perhaps I would choose them again, knowing the destination." That's a generous way to look at suffering. Not generous, just realistic. We cannot change the past. We can only decide what to build from what remains. Emma ran up to the porch, the puppy tumbling at her heels. "Mama, can Biscuit sleep in my room tonight?" "Biscuit?" "That is what I named him, because he is the color of your biscuits." Caleb laughed. "Fair enough reasoning." "He can sleep in your room if you promise to let him out if he needs to go outside," Leanne said. "I promise." Emma scooped up the puppy and ran inside, her footsteps loud on the wooden floors. "She's happy," Caleb said softly. "Yes." Finally. Leanne moved closer to him, resting her hand on his shoulder. "We all are." He shifted James carefully, and reached up to lace his fingers through hers. Got plans for the future, Mrs. Mercer? Many plans. Teaching Emma to read better, watching James grow, expanding the kitchen garden, learning to ride well enough to actually help with cattle work. Ambitious. That a problem? Not even slightly. He looked up at her, his pale eyes warm. I love that you're always looking forward, always building. Someone taught me that surviving is not enough, that we must build lives worth living. Smart person, whoever that was. Very smart, and very stubborn, and very dear to me. He pulled her down for a kiss, gentle and sweet and full of promise. James stirred between them but didn't wake. Later that night, after Emma and James were both asleep and the ranch had settled into quiet, Leanne and Caleb lay in bed together, watching moonlight paint silver patterns across the floor. Can I tell you something? Caleb asked. Always. That first day when I rode up to your cabin in the storm, I almost didn't stop. Was running late, wanted to get home before dark. Almost convinced myself someone else would check on you. Leanne's breath caught. What made you stop? Couldn't stand the thought of someone dying alone because I was too impatient to knock on a door. My sister died alone. I swore I'd never let that happen again if I could prevent it. He turned to face her. So I stopped, knocked, and found you. And saved my life. No, you saved your own life by being strong enough to accept help. I just offered the door. You have said that before, but Caleb, offering the door is not a small thing. Many people would have ridden past. Then I'm glad I'm not most people. So am I. She kissed him softly. So very, very glad. They held each other in the darkness, two people who'd found each other against impossible odds, who'd built a family from grief and hope, who'd created something lasting from the raw materials of survival and choice. Outside, the prairie stretched endlessly under stars that had witnessed countless stories of loss and love. The wind sang through the grass, carrying the scent of sage and earth and possibility. And inside the main house of the Double M Ranch, the Mercer family slept peacefully, wrapped in the warmth of belonging and the promise of tomorrow. Leanne had crossed an ocean and survived a winter that should have killed her. She'd lost everything and found it again in unexpected forms. She'd learned that family wasn't just blood, but choice, that home wasn't a place, but the people who made you feel safe, and that love could grow in the harshest soil if tended with patience and care. She'd knocked on death's door and found Caleb Mercer on the other side, offering something better. Now, years later, well, months that felt like years, seasons that held lifetimes, she lay beside her husband with their children sleeping down the hall and their future spreading before them like the endless prairie. She'd found her place. Not the one she'd imagined when she left China, but something better. Something earned through suffering and choice and the daily work of building a life with someone who saw her as an equal. She'd found home, and that, Leanne thought as sleep claimed her, was worth every frozen night in that dying cabin, worth every loss and every tear. Worth the long journey that had led her here, to this man, to this family, to this future. She'd survived, but more than that, she'd learned to thrive. The wind whispered across the prairie, carrying stories of all the lives lived and lost on this harsh, beautiful land. But inside the walls of the Double M Ranch, warmth and love held firm against the darkness. And tomorrow, when the sun rose over the Montana territory, the Mercer family would wake to face whatever came next, together.